Good morning. I'm very happy to be here and very happy to be chatting with my friend Corb from Level Access, Thought Leadership. So tell me about, I'm Monica, I'm from G0 ICT. So Corb, we have 15 minutes, so I'll go right into it. Business growth through accessibility. Every year, Level Access creates a report. So tell me a little bit about the result of the report. Is there any surprise on what you saw of the report, and how are we advancing on accessibility?
Yeah, thank you very much for the time, Monica, and thank you everyone for trudging through the Austrian snow this morning to be here. I think that this report is one where we survey 1,600 digital experience professionals around the world, and about 700 here in the EU. And what's surprising for me about the report is that we have a big gap right now in the confidence level of accessibility. What I mean is that in our report, what we found is that brands understand that the European Accessibility Act applies to them, but yet only a third are confident that they actually comply with the law. And then when we look at even a step further and we say, how confident are you in the accessibility of your primary digital experience? They're very confident. And yet a very small number say that they don't worry about regulation. So most people say, I'm really confident, my experience is amazing, and yet I'm really worried about the regulations and litigation and legislation around digital accessibility, which tells us that they have this confidence, but then they realize that user experience is far worse potentially, or it's unknown. I made a great marketing site, but can somebody buy a ticket? Can somebody sign up for my services? Can they buy my product? Maybe not.
So this big gap, and you're asking accessibility professionals, what do you think that the gap is? And the people that are saying we're compliant, I'm assuming, is the leadership. They're only worried about risk. But when you're asking the accessibility professionals, they'll worry about the actual user experience. So why do you think this gap exists in the process? If I want to create my product and make it more accessible, why this gap exists, and how do you see from your experience the process of making accessibility, the ownership of accessibility? Is that the reason for the gap and the unknown variable, are we really accessible or not?
I think that might be part of it, but I would say the other big piece is that we saw fewer organizations are doing manual testing. So 11% fewer organizations this year are doing testing with actual assistive technology, screen readers, keyboards, switch devices. What they're relying on for a lot of these metrics are automated testing. And they run these automated reports. The automated report says, I'm doing great. Any automated scan is going to tell you, whether you've done any work on accessibility, you're probably going to say, I'm 60% compliant. I do a little bit of work, I'm probably 70 or 80%. That sounds really good. It also means that 1 out of every 5 buttons on your site doesn't work for a user with assistive technology. But what that really is telling you is only about a small percentage of accessibility issues. So when we're not doing that testing with real users, we're missing that key data point. But I think the other part that we're seeing is that people aren't connecting this to the real business drivers. If we're here in Austria, right, and if the U-Bahn was one of our customers, if they were to say, as an organization, it's most important this year that we increase ridership, but then the accessibility team is saying, we still have this % compliance, we are still chasing this many defects, we have this many serious problems, accessibility will always be looked at as a cost. And instead, what we need to be doing is reframing those conversations. We need to be saying that the CEO, the leadership wants us to increase ridership. What are all the ways that accessibility helps us to increase ridership? Hey, we've now made it so that you can easily find your train. We've made it so that you can buy tickets at our kiosks using all kinds of different assistive technology to comply with the European Accessibility Act. We've made it so that the material out there is not just marketing speak on our website. It actually tells you how to ride this train system as a tourist coming from Minnesota. That is going to increase ridership. That story aligns to leadership. What we find is that a lot of times we're telling a separate accessibility story instead of telling the whole company narrative and really tying all those metrics together.
And from what you're saying, leadership is only listening to cost and potential risk instead of us, accessibility professionals, selling to leadership. This is a success story. This is what we need to do.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, and that it's impacting real users, and that we're also getting the chance to say that our teams, yes, they're using they're thinking about accessibility in the planning stage, in the design, the development stage. We're thinking about accessibility in the QA stage. But only about a third of organizations are thinking about accessibility in each of those stages. But of that third that's looking at it at design, they don't have the tools in place for their designers to actually think about accessibility in a scalable way. So they're thinking, that's a good start, but thinking doesn't result in a better user experience. What we need is those teams to have tools embedded in their process so that as a designer is designing, as a developer is coding, and as an author is writing, we're giving them all that they need to make that accessible so that we don't have to tell the story of we're doing this really expensive audit at the end of the day and we found all these issues and gosh, these teams have to go back and rework. We need to tell the story that says, we made this super easy. Our designers are still focused on designing. They're just using AI and accessibility tools in their process. It's not that big, scary, expensive audit. It's just making that work easier for them every day that's resulting in that key benefit at the end of the day.
And I like what you're saying, but we were talking about the gap, no? So if every different team or part of the supply process or the development of the product owns their own accessibility, do you think that we need the figure of the centralized accessibility leader that will really check on the work that everybody is doing on accessibility?
I think so. I was surprised a few years ago when somebody at a major airline told me that in your process of booking a ticket, you actually talk to different teams every time that page reloads. The home page, that's a marketing team. You get your search results, that's actually coming from a dispatch team. You go to to see what seats are available, that's a team responsible only for passenger experience. Payment, that's owned by finance. And so if you're the accessibility leader, you're probably the one unicorn who's supposed to make all those things super accessible. And so what you need more than that centralized leader is you need all that data in one place. Because as a customer, I don't care what team I'm talking to. I'm just trying to get from my home to Vienna. And I can't do that easily when each of these teams now releases something out into the wild without checking with an accessibility leader first. But more importantly, that accessibility leader needs to have the executive buy-in from the executive team saying, hey, booking team, seating team, finance team, this is Monica. Monica is the one I've tasked with making sure our sites are accessible. It's really important to me that you do this work, so when she tells you to do it, you better do it. The teams that we've talked to, a big part of them have a lot of these pieces in place. What they don't have is the leaders actually making that communication directly and frequently so that teams know to pay attention to that leader in accessibility working across all those teams.
And if we think about the skills development of all those teams and the tools, no, what I've seen in the market is even the automatic tools, they're very much alike. They're thinking about the standard per se, but do we need to develop then role-based training? Do we need to develop tools automated are not specialized for different moments of the product development cycle? Because those are different skills that we need to develop. Do you think that those skills exist? Because we still have the accessibility expert, but to be able to embed in the different process, we need to develop different accessibility skills, no?
I think you're right, and I think it goes beyond training. So training is important. We talked about this yesterday in the session on aviation, that training, if we have more teams who know how to work with users with disabilities, when I get on a plane, they know how to talk to me. If I'm deaf, they know not to just shout at me, but maybe to communicate in different ways, right? That's helpful. But what ultimately makes the difference is we're all better writers today because Microsoft Word spell checks our documents and grammar checks our documents as we write in any language. Imagine if we didn't have, we could have all the training and education in how we spell and use grammar, but if we don't have those tools right at our fingertips as we write, we're not going to be able to make a meaningful difference. We need the spell checkers of accessibility in every stage, and more than we need them in an extra tool, we actually need the AIs to talking to each other. It's called the MCP, right? This protocol that lets AI talk to each other so that that agent that goes out and designs and builds, it's going to be able to check with an accessibility agent along the way to validate its work, to validate its thinking, and update what it's ultimately producing. We can't just teach the developer how to write better code because the developer's not writing code anymore. The developer's talking to an AI. The AI is the developer. So we need an AI to tell the AI what to do, and then an AI to check the AI's work. We're getting very meta here. But the idea being that AI is ultimately the solution to this and is connecting all these pieces together.
And where do you see in the process we were talking about eliminating the gap. So I use AI, hopefully, for someone from the audience, please develop that. We need this spell checker, accessibility checker in all the moments of the process.
Give us a call.
Exactly. Link to our tools and link to the role that I'm doing. But at what moment do you recommend involve the assistive technology and the end user, because then we have this disconnect between all the testing that the developers are doing and then customer service that are getting data from the user, and this is a disconnection as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. And what I would say before we start there, right, we look at how 9 in 10 organizations in the EU and roughly 8 in 10 around the world have the 3 pieces that we think are critical to the start of an accessibility program. You need that policy, you need a dedicated budget, and you need a centralized owner. When you have those in place, then we look to the tooling conversation, and then we look to how can we bring those users along. Because what we want to make sure, we want to start with users with disabilities, to be clear. Users with disabilities, part of that policy, part of that centralized budget, part of the dedicated authority. Those are all really important parts that we bring users along for. But ultimately, if we don't have those 3 places if we don't get those 3 things in place first, what we find is that the user just becomes, oh man, we built a bad product and I feel bad. But ultimately, I didn't make the product any better for the disabled user who's trying to get their job done tomorrow.
And if we think that when we're doing a market research and designers are talking or thinking about different personas in order to think about the potential client, and that is the process where we start to include persons with disabilities. But I love what you said, budget, policy, specialized budget, and then
Dedicated authority.
Dedicated authority. And if we follow the process, do you think what you're seeing now in the EU, where companies are saying that they're accessible but are super afraid of risk of being sued, if you go directly to the end user, then you will be much more confident in knowing that your process is being successful, no?
That's right, because we can have tools tell us what percentage of our site is accessible. But if all I'm trying to do is book a ticket, and that's 5% of your website, I really don't care that the rest of it's perfect. I still can't get my job done. I can't book my ticket. And so, yeah, when we get those pieces in place, when we bring the real user in, and the user says, thumbs up, regulations aside and technical conformance aside, thumbs up, I can do this easily, right? That's the ultimate marker of success. We tell that story through the same things that our CEO is saying, that our executive leaders are saying, that the key performance indicator that matter to the leaders and the accessibility community, they're the same markers. When we get all of those aligned, then we find that we're confident because, one, people with disabilities would rather talk to you directly and say, how do I buy my ticket? How do I get my job done? Than they would to go any sort of litigation route or to call the regulating authority and say, I want to file a complaint because I can't do something. That's a lot of work. I'd rather just buy my ticket, get on the train, and get where I'm going.
And going to the topic of our conversation, accessibility for business, we need to monitor and have KPIs in order to see accessibility more like an investment than a cost. So if we're doing all that monitoring, if we're asking all those, how do you recommend to start measuring and really measuring calculating the return of our investment? It is an investment. It will have an impact on our business, a positive impact on our business.
Absolutely. And I think what I'm about to tell people here, you're going to immediately want to tune out, right? If I tell you that when in our survey that 91% of people said better accessibility contributes to increased customer satisfaction, we all go, yeah, duh, right? But are we telling our leaders that story? Are we telling our leaders enough that this is going to improve our brand reputation, that it's going to improve our customer retention, our revenue, right? We all know that to be true. 4 in 5 say that accessibility creates revenue growth. But we need to be able to show that to our executives to say, as one of our customers did, we increased the color contrast on a button in a delivery app. It was the place order button. We increased the color contrast because those accessibility people told me to. 27% higher click-through rate with a higher contrast button. Why? Because you could see it. You could find it. Right? But if we're not tracking the click-through rate on that button and saying, that's interesting. On March 1st, we made the color contrast change, and on April 1st, we saw a huge bump. Now, we can't always, right, it could very well be that we did a great marketing campaign, could be that there was a snowstorm and people all ordered in. But we still need to be able to say, it might not be cause and effect, but it sure helped, right? It sure happened around the same time. Isn't that convenient? We better be tracking those metrics.
Corp, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please share those numbers with us. We need to make sure that we monitor the market. We need to make sure to pass the message that it is an investment, it's not a cost. Thank you very much, Corp, and thank you for everyone.
Thank you, everyone.